Hello, everyone. Welcome back to episode 4 of Technological. Today we have a special guest, Chris Caruso, who's currently a software engineer at Microsoft. With Chris, we really talked about three main things. How to recruit for a software engineering position at a big technology firm such as Microsoft. So this includes having passion projects, going to the job fairs that are at your universities or colleges, learning the skills that you need to through classes, because this is really important because it's emphasized in your different coding interviews. We also talked about what it's like to move from a junior level software engineer role to a senior level software engineer role, and how you have to think about upskilling yourself in different ways, including not just focused on hard skills, but also focused on soft skills and working with other people on the team. Lastly, we talked about what the differences are between a product manager and a software engineer, and how Chris really thought about his career starting out of college and figuring out, do I want to do software engineering or do I want to do product management? So give the podcast a listen, and if you enjoy it, make sure to like and subscribe to our channel. And if you feel that other people will enjoy it too, don't hesitate to share it on Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, or LinkedIn, and just get the content out there. Thanks so much for listening, and we hope you enjoy it.
Hello, everyone. Welcome to episode 4 of the Techknowledgical podcast. We've got Chris Caruso here, who we all went to high school with, actually, and he's here from Seattle. And Chris is currently a software engineer at Microsoft. So we really wanted to get into, his draw to software engineering, some of the stuff around what he does on a day-to-day basis, how others can break into the field, and how you can really grow your career. So with that, I'll hand it over to you, Chris. Why don't you, if you could introduce yourself, that'd be great.
Yeah, well, first of all, thanks for having me on the show, and it's awesome being here and seeing all these old faces. That's great. Yeah, so like you said, I'm up in Seattle at Microsoft. Been bouncing between teams these last few years, and I'm senior engineer here. Yeah, that's pretty much the gist of it, and we can get into all the details.
Yeah, awesome. So why don't we go into maybe your journey from high school to college, what you studied in college, and then how you got into software engineering, and then how that led you to Microsoft.
Yeah. So when I asked myself what ultimately led me down this path, and it brought me all the way back to probably the end of middle school or the beginning of high school. And actually, even further than that, it was when I was younger, and I love to take things apart and try to understand how they worked. This kind of is more of the general engineer in me, I guess. And then one day ultimately I landed on the question, how does that program or that piece of software that I'm using work, and started learning about that, and went down that path and that journey, and found that I really liked it. And it clicked with me. It was kind of magic that you can make something that people use out of nothing that's useful. Like mechanical engineering, you have to have all these machines that can be dangerous and stuff, and maybe for people that had access to that would be their thing, and I can see that. But for me, I had a computer. My dad worked for Microsoft. He was in the tech world, and I had access to the tools like Visual Studio and things that professional software engineers had. So I used those tools, and I was able to teach myself from an early age and really get into it. So that's what led me up to getting started. C# was my first programming language. It was all passion project driven. It's how do I go? I want this thing to help me out. Typically it was hand in hand with video games. I'm an avid video game player, and it's oh, I need this thing to go do that to help me. So I learned how to do that stuff, and it grew. When I was in high school, took AP computer science. That kind of fueled my passion more. It made it very clear that I was good at what I like to do. Good confidence check and skill check. I did FBLA. Wow, this is a long time ago, but I think it stood for Future Business Leaders of America, and Yeah, I did the desktop like programming one basically, and we did some like they had us do some statistical software, and I won like state and went to nationals, and had a lot of fun with that. So I think that ultimately cemented my like path in like at least learning how to code. Software engineering is you grow into that. That's a very different thing than just coding, of course, but it's the foundation. And I think having that like self-taught passion uh, put me up for success in this path.
Awesome. Yeah, I remember, just like growing up with you and hanging out with like our friend group back in the day. Like you were always into computers, and I remember you like even put together and made your own computer and stuff like that. So I think like you always had an interest in computers and technology and stuff like that. So I think I hear a lot about people who have that interest, who get into development, software development eventually. But could you talk a little bit about how, you talked a little bit about high school, what you learned there, what you did there. What kind of classes did you take in college? And would love to know how those classes prepared you, if at all, to be a developer.
Yeah, that's a great question. And this touches on the difference between like college and the real world when you get a software engineering job. And so when you go in freshman year, you don't know anything. Some people have an idea, and like I certainly had an idea of coding, right? And so the classes that you take at the beginning are very introductory. And for myself, those were like I breezed through them. I knew everything in them. So then I started to seek out, the higher level courses for things that I didn't know. So, data structures and algorithms were something that you just don't really learn like when you're doing your own kind of like passion projects. I mean, maybe some, but, you're not going to think of like, how am I going to traverse a graph in the most like optimal way? Like, but I mean, maybe some people do, but I didn't. So the classes were, pretty instrumental in understanding those like key pillars. And data structures and algorithms was a big one. One that really has stuck with me that I would highly recommend anyone trying to pursue software engineering to do would be to take a programming languages course. I really loved that class, where it's not just about learning programming languages. In fact, we only learned one programming language in that class, but the core part of the class was building your own programming language. And that has stuck with me like for a very long time, and like influenced like a lot of what I've done. Even though it's largely unrelated, it's been able to help with that. So yeah, I mean, you'll take the other courses like operating systems, distributed systems. There's a whole bunch of technical classes that you'll have to take, and just keep an eye out, to anyone listening to this, keep an eye out, what draws your interest. That'll be important later. And double down on what you're interested in is my recommendation as you get into your like senior year and you have more of those open slots and you can pick more of your specialization.
Yeah, I think that's really helpful. And the classes you take in college also, like I studied computer science too, and like a lot of the classes I took, any software engineering job or interview, they kind of translated directly to like what you had to know for the interview. I know like data structures and algorithms like a fundamental part for all the software engineering jobs and like interviews that we went in for. So I'm really curious. So now you're in college, right? You want to be a software engineer. How did you think about what company you wanted to work for, and like like do I want to go work for a startup, or do I want to go work in like for like a bigger tech company, and how you kind of went about like finding your job and I guess like in the end choosing it too. So
yeah, that journey began fairly quickly for me. I think quicker than it does for most. It was probably 6 weeks in to me starting my first semester freshman year. They I think every school has like a career fair kind of thing going on, like in the fall, probably early fall. And so I went and attended it with some of the friends that I had made. And Microsoft was always one that, I mean, it was a household name because my dad worked there for so long. And and then there were a bunch of other companies as well. So went there, talked to the companies, talked to the recruiters, saw what kind of opportunities there were. And the Microsoft recruiter, was like, yeah, like, actually, you know what? I got my friend and I got private audience with the recruiter for Microsoft. I'm not sure under what circumstance, but I remember we were able to not talk to them just on the, the floor with everyone who, and, they're just collecting resumes. But so, I got to talk to her, and I was telling her about all of the passion projects that I was doing. And that's what really caught the recruiter's attention, I think. And so she was like, cool, can you like give me your resume? And I was like, yeah, let me go make one. So I went home that night and typed up a resume with, it was basically just a list of passion projects that I had carried over from high school and had started on in college and over the summer. So that was my resume. And then that impressed them enough, I guess, that they were able to, argue for me to go up to do an on-site interview. Actually, there's probably a phone interview that I don't remember in between. And then, went up there, did the on-site, and the rest was history. I had to obviously like study in between, for the interview because, so like I was saying, the first freshman courses are introductory, right? So those, you're supposed to just be learning like, what are keywords in a programming language? How do I fit this all together? How do I think like a programmer? But like the interviews that you have to do really take it to a different level. And they expect you to be able to write those algorithms that you don't know at a freshman, 6 weeks in at least. So I had to ramp up pretty quickly with that, through things like cracking the coding interview. We can talk more about this later, but like LeetCode exists today. That didn't exist back then. You just had Google, friends, a whiteboard, and cracking the coding interview. And then you had to kind of just practice a lot of that. And so that led me to my first internship with Microsoft my freshman summer. So it was, they told me, the team that I was going to be assigned to, and they're like, yeah, you're going to be working in this like business, like data processing team. I forget how they worded it, but it sounded like so dry to me. I was like, I hope this is going to be like fun. But everything worked out like as like the best it could because I landed on this team. It wasn't called this back then. It's called Power BI now. It's the team that I'm working on. And it was a really small team back then, like 13 people, and led by like Nick Caldwell, he's the VP of engineering at Twitter now. So he's gone a long way, but yeah, he was my direct when I first started. He was my direct manager, and the team was super passionate, full of like, all-star team, almost like a startup basically at Microsoft. And I was just, thrown into the pot of learning and exposure to that culture. And that really like, hooked me. The work was good. And the people were really what made the team what it was. And that's something that I've cemented like throughout my career and learned that the people really are the team. And the work is like something that comes with the team in terms of enjoyment on the team and like your success, I think. So that was my first summer. Then they were like, oh yeah, you want to come back like, for another internship? And so I was just like, yeah, like, okay, I'm going to come back. Like, this was a lot of fun. So didn't do anything. I didn't have to do anything. I just had the offer in hand leaving Microsoft. So I just knew that I was going to go back to Microsoft my second year. After my second year, the team had grown and there were like, it was still a ton of fun. I was also kind of thinking more about, are there other opportunities? So, I did look at other companies, but ultimately, like, I just felt like, I don't know, it felt like I had found like a home on that team and I knew I could just go back to that team. So that's what I did. I just went back. And then my senior year, I really kind of got into this mode where I was exploring my own ideas for like startups potentially. Like we did, my friend and I, my friend Ben and I did Startup Weekend. I forget who hosts. I think it might be, I believe it's Google. I'm not sure though. And it's basically a hackathon focused on starting a business. But my friend and I always took it as like a hackathon, technical hackathon. So we did something, we came in first place. And that was a lot of fun. And then we did it again my senior year. So the one I won was my junior year, I guess. And then so my senior year, we did it again. We didn't win, but I did this machine learning thing, and that was a lot of fun. And it was like actually a really interesting idea that I thought had like a ton of business potential, and it still does in this world of, growing machine learning interest and applications. And then there were a few other ideas that we like executed on around IoT. So there were a bunch of these like startup things that I was like, oh, do I want to go do a startup, or do I want to, go take my Microsoft offer? At the end of the day, it came down to I wanted the stability that Microsoft provided, and being a 3-time intern at Microsoft, they give you, it's a nice package, obviously, and I was pretty happy with all that. And I did look at other companies then too, and yeah, I went back to Microsoft because of Power BI and the people there. I learned so much from those people, and I continued to. So that's what led me to Microsoft from college. Yeah.
Awesome. I think one cool thing there that you mentioned is for people trying to stand out, right, who are maybe CS majors or some technical major looking for internships or new jobs, working on interesting projects, right, outside of work is what really draws attention to recruiters, right, in companies. So yeah, that was cool.
Yeah, I honestly look for this myself. Projects, extracurricular, I'll call them extracurricular. That sounds like a very formal word, but, projects that aren't related to, anything official like school or something. I find that those are the best projects that I look for in a candidate because they show passion. At least, I'm reflecting myself onto the candidate at that point, but I think it's a good indicator for good candidates where passion is necessary for software engineering. So I look for that for sure. And the best way to do that is just put your projects open source on GitHub, and that's what I do with mine. And it gives the interviewer and yourself a good talking point. And if you're lucky, you might even get to show off what you did to your interviewer, and that's like best case scenario, because then they're looking at your real code. It's showing, not telling. That's like a big thing in my interviews, and yeah.
Do you mind just giving a few examples of like what some of those passion projects were that really caught the recruiter's attention back then?
Yeah. So I did. So I really got into machine learning at one point, and mainly my senior year. I honestly don't remember the projects that caught their attention, and they definitely grew in magnitude over time. But I can talk about maybe one of my favorite ones, and kind of just display the passion that comes from that. So my senior year, I really got into deep learning and deep into like, how do neural networks work? What's the math behind them? How do I apply them? What problems can I use them for? What can I solve with these things? And I wanted to actually, during my first internship at Microsoft, my manager, Nick, set me up with someone at Microsoft Research because I was interested in Microsoft Research. And he was like a director over there, and he was telling me about some of the awesome work he was doing. And he was like, yeah, we're working on a machine learning system that can produce like a caption for video. And I was like, oh, wow, that's like really advanced. That's like very hard. I don't know how I would do that. So that stuck with me for like a couple of years. And then finally, when I got the machine learning bug, I was like, I wonder if I can tackle that problem. Now, mind you, this wasn't my first problem that I tackled, so I had a pretty good idea of things at that point. But I was like, can I take a data set of GIFs, and can I try to produce like captions from them? And so the code's up on GitHub. You can check that out if you want. But it's basically just a deep learning neural network that takes a GIF and gives you a sentence and describes it. And it worked pretty well. It was a pretty big success. So I was happy with that, and I learned so much from it. And it showed like the upper limits of machine learning at the time to me. Of course, what is it, 4 years later now, like the heights have gone like, orders of magnitude more, but it was exciting to be in it at that time and learn that. And so that was something I found that I was passionate about, and I doubled down on with the passion projects, and now it's on GitHub.
Yeah, that's awesome. I think like starting a niche that's showing passion and then actually going and tackling those problems is like a big thing, right? Like you want to show you have interest, and that's the best way to learn is just like, tinkering with the code yourself and actually working through it. We're gonna have to get your GitHub username and probably link it in the bottom so people can go check it out.
Yeah.
But I do want to kind of jump into like your role now at Microsoft and kind of like when you like as a junior level like software engineer, like what did your day-to-day look like? And also, can you just kind of describe the product that you were working on? So like we know what Power BI is, but some of our listeners might not have worked with the product yet, or like know exactly what it is. So
so I'll briefly talk about my journey at Microsoft, and we can go into detail later if you have questions with that. So for my internship, right into Power BI, I immediately got reorged. So first of all, what's Power BI? Power BI is a business intelligence product, and essentially it allows you to visualize and understand data. So businesses have a lot of data and they need to be able to make insights. So, to make real business decisions about it. How are we going to spend our money? How to, it can be a bunch of things. But it typically, at the end of the day, boils down to dollar signs. And sometimes if you're looking at a big table, that's not the most optimal way to view things. So Power BI has a bunch of different ways you can visualize this through different visuals. Anything from like a line chart to a scatter plot to like a map. You can throw these together in like reports and dashboards. We have other solutions where you can that allow better data processing. So really, Power BI is an end-to-end solution from I have data to I want to make insights and business decisions about it, and we try to fill whatever that gap is in between. And there's from a technical side, it's very interesting. So that's why I find myself here so often. But so I started at Microsoft, immediately got reorged to another team called Dynamics 365 for Talent. So that was actually a good move. At the time, I was kind of disappointed by it because it took me away from Power BI. But the reason it was a good move was because it was to a team that didn't exist. And what that means is there's a ton of opportunity. It took my whole team got reorged, not just myself. So what that meant is we got lifted from our current product and it's new directive. You need to go work on this new thing, which was exciting because I got to play a bigger role in it than I ever would have if I just joined Power BI because everything's done. Deployments are set up, builds are set up. How do we actually productionize this thing? Like setting up the whole tech stack is done for you. You just do, your small little features, and then that would be work normally. But with shifting to this new team, I really had that opportunity to grow like exponentially more than I would have in a normal role. So my junior role may not reflect a normal junior role, but I can talk about both. So a typical junior role, you'll come in and you're expected to still be learning things. So, you'll be working with a lot of other team members to get your work done. And so it's essentially like a ramp up time, but you're still doing product things with that. You might be fixing bugs, doing your smaller features, but your scope is small and your impact is also lower, relatively speaking, to higher roles. One of the things that you typically see when you go up is a good proxy for it is impact, the impact that you have on your team and the product. Yeah, I don't know where I was going with that, but sometimes I just get lost. So what does the next level from a junior look like? You expand more scope. Essentially, you start to take on more pieces of a feature. Maybe you're doing the whole feature. And as you grow, so by SE2, at least at Microsoft, roles are different. Levels.fyi is a good way to kind of get a comparison between different companies in terms of what that level relates to. So an SE2 at Microsoft typically is expected to be able to take on like a whole feature and execute on it. And they have the impact of typically like 1 to 2 people you're helping. Now, once you get up to senior, you're expected, to definitely like you own whole features and maybe sets of features or whole pieces of a product at that point, small pieces of a product. And your goal is like more of a tech lead, you could think of it as, where you're leading technical decisions. You still code, of course, but you do less coding as you move up, I typically see, at least proportional to the rest of the work. As you grow, you obviously get more efficient at your work. So, what a senior can do, in an hour may be what, a junior can do in like a day or something, just because they're familiar with the systems, they've done it before. So that journey from junior to senior is, and everything in between is really about learning, becoming familiar, and growing your impact in terms of people, your product, and the scope of your work. At senior, you typically find yourself helping people a lot more. I find myself doing a bunch more code reviews. I split my day probably equally between coding, helping people, code reviews, and meetings. Whereas when I started, it was just coding, other than the daily stand-up meeting that we had. And then, you gradually get exposed to more of those things as you go up. So those are kind of some of the things you can expect.
Awesome. And just to kind of build on that, I guess 2 questions for you. So question number 1, for somebody who's just coming into the, junior software engineering role, right? Less than 2 years of experience or right out of college, how can they understand, how to grow and make sure that they're growing in the right direction to become a senior engineer or someone, more with more scope and responsibility in the engineering organization? How do they grow? How do they make sure they're growing at the right pace? What are some measures of gauge? And then also, what do you think some of the big skills are that engineers should be working on to make that journey easier?
Yeah, I mean, so for me, it all starts with passion. You find your passion, and if you're able to execute on that passion in a job, you'll just pretty plainly be successful, I think. Finding the right team and the right opportunity is also important. It's not just about your aptitude, it's about kind of luck, being in the right place at the right time. Obviously, you can seek that out. So that's something I would look for, good opportunity, good team where you can have a lot of impact. Something that, if you're looking for getting to the next level, being promoted really is about, I'm performing at that next level. So you should have that title. It's not about, I think you're going to get there, so I'm going to give you this promotion. It's the other way around. I'm there, so I have it. So just because your role might be junior, don't act like a junior. Constantly expand your comfort zone, take on more scope, whether this be independently or through your manager. Depends on how hands-on your manager is. There's, the whole spectrum there. If your manager's hands-off, just go and do stuff after you finished your work. And, in my first team, I took on the build systems. I don't think my manager ever told me to go do that, but I did that. And by the time at the end of that adventure, I was managing the whole build system in addition to all my other work. And that was kind of like my side thing, as well as I helped, build our, basically the library for components that we built our product with, and help build and maintain the standardized way we did all that. So I really kind of dug myself in, and it became integral at some point, into the whole product development. And that was just purely through me seeing this empty opportunity that no one else was filling, or that, maybe someone needed help with, to really bring to its full potential and just go double down on that and execute on it. So that's the best way that you'll find to advance your career, advance yourself, and grow as a software engineer. And also it helps you grow as an individual, because you'll be pushed into comfort zones where, say, a lot of engineers, a lot of people, at least in college, may not think that you need soft skills as a software engineer, and oh, you don't like to talk, maybe, or you're shy, so you should just go into software engineering or something like that, or you'll be fine. But the reality is you actually have to do quite a bit of talking, and you have to be able to very effectively, communicate your ideas, especially very complicated topics. And you also have to politics is a thing, right? No matter where you go in corporate America, that doesn't, that also applies to software engineering, of course. So you have to be able to win over people's affection for your ideas. So that's a skill that I am still learning, and I probably will be for a long time. And it's something that I don't think I certainly never thought of in college. So if I had started on that and pushed myself out into the comfort zone earlier, maybe I could be further with that regard. And so that's something to look out for. Another skill that I don't think a lot of people think about.
Yeah, that's all great advice. So you touched a few times on your day to day, and you had mentioned like now that you're a senior software engineer, you've got like instead of just doing coding all day, you're also doing code reviews, and a few other things like almost mentoring some of the junior engineers. But one like process that we've heard in software and software development is called Agile, and I'm just curious, like, want to know. Does if Microsoft uses Agile, the Agile process of development, but also here, like, if you could explain to our listeners, like, what is Agile, what are all the meetings that make up Agile, and then how that makes up your day to day and week, that would be pretty helpful.
Yeah, Agile is an interesting thing. I think a lot of places will say that they're Agile. But at the end of the day, no one, I think, actually knows what Agile is, to be honest. And so does Microsoft practice Agile? A form of it, probably. So when I think of an Agile process, I think of a process that isn't like waterfall driven. So, everything's not planned, way far in advance, and things are flexible. That's the key. So do we have a flexible development style? Yes. So you still have a PM, who thinks about the customer's needs and comes up with ways to solve those needs in terms of product features. But those typically, developers still have the opportunity to work with that and, add their ideas and inject their ideas. So we're Agile in that regard. And, Agile has, stand-up is typically like a key component. That's the first thing, if you ask me, what my day is, right? We have stand-up. That's the first thing, right? Where we talk about, some people treat it as a status meeting, but really it's supposed to be a meeting about, okay, I'm blocked on this, like help me unblock it. Or, but more often than not, people turn into a status meeting where it's like, I'm working on this. I did this yesterday. This is what I plan to do today. And then, I talk about any blockers and the team helps you with that. It's supposed to be a quick meeting and, you'll find that it scope creeps sometimes, often. But there are varying methodologies and you have to have like a scrum leader typically to organize the whole thing and someone who's passionate about that to really nail it. But that's how the day starts. And then, the day can branch into a whole bunch of things after that. So yes, coding obviously is a big piece. You have to code to get the features done as a software engineer. Now, coding involves not only writing the code for the actual feature or whatever you're working on, you also write tests and you also write like things to do like automation or monitoring and alerting. So just coding, your actual thing is it's not a small part, but it's like at least half. So there's more to it than just that. So then what else do you do? So there's helping people one-on-one, mentoring people. So this is the life and the day of me, right? Being a senior, so a junior may experience less of these things. So, people may have technical questions. How do I do this? How should I go about doing that? They may be stuck with a problem or they may be asking for advice. So, these days I jump on a call with people and help them real quick, but otherwise you can pair program if you're in the office, and that's a great way to effectively help people. Another thing that I spend quite a bit of time doing is code reviews. You being a senior, you impact a lot more people, and there's you're overseeing a lot more things technically. So you may have set up the framework for a system, and then people are plugging in the pieces. So you, I don't know, at least for me as the owner of such a system, I, want to diligently make sure, everything going into that is how I want it to be and architecturally correct. And the code is clean, well written, well tested, and, things like that. Then there's meetings, of course, and meetings where those soft skills often come in that people don't think about. So, those could be planning meetings for like the upcoming like semester of work, or it could be syncs, about like I've got this problem like as a team, like architecturally, or this feature problem, like how are we going to solve it? Just if you need multiple people, there's a whole bunch of miscellaneous meetings you can have, of course, right? But I guess my point is they're not an insignificant chunk of time as a software engineer, and neither are the other things like code reviews and helping people. So equally as important as coding.
Yeah, definitely. And sorry, I think that was a really good question around Agile too, because I used to be in consulting, and we would just, go to like some of these like Fortune 100 companies that would try and implement Agile, and it was just so fragmented across the board. It was just interesting to see like what worked, what didn't work, and how people kind of adapted like to the new methodologies. So I kind of wanted to take it back to like how you thought about your career just for 1 second. I know you studied computer science, and a lot of current computer science students are thinking like how do they want to take their career? Do they want to go into software engineering? Or do they want to go into product management? And like I think like some of the questions we get is like, how do you think about my career if I did software engineering versus product management? Like what different opportunities would open up? So I would love to get like your thoughts on this and how you thought about it. And then a follow-on question to that is like, how do you work with PMs right now? And do you ever like see yourself maybe transitioning to that role, or like staying in the current role you're in?
Yeah, so yes, ultimately it comes down to, to help answer this question for yourself, are you a technical person? And do you really love writing code? Or are you a technical person and is coding like a secondary thing to like a product or the customer? And I think if you answer the question yes to, I really like coding and I really like the technical details, then I think, that's where the developer path is the right path. And I think a product manager, not being one myself, but I think, knowing the people who are there, they're the people who really just love finding those customer, issues or customer, things that they can help solve, customer solutions, finding those solutions. And so if you enjoy thinking about a product more than you do coding it, maybe that's like the litmus test for one or the other. So for me, certainly I like the technical side. So that's the path that I've chosen, and I think I'm gonna stick with it. There's PMs do quite a bit more talking, I think, than devs. So if you don't enjoy talking to a lot of people per day, then that's also another good indicator that maybe dev is the right thing for you. Yeah. And, I don't know, kind of going into where the paths lead once you're technical. There's typically two prongs that you face, and you typically face it around like the senior level, where you have the choice, do I want to continue going technical, or do I want to start to think about management? That's when you really start to have to ask yourself, how do I want to make that impact going forward? Because at least at Microsoft, you go from senior to principal, and that's just the level. You can switch roles though at that point, where you can go from a software engineer to an architect once you've reached the principal level. And an architect is someone who really sits back and thinks about the cohesiveness of the technical at a high level perspective of a product or systems. And so you're doing less coding. There's a spectrum of architects too who do code and who don't, and some spend more time on whiteboards than others. And so there's room there for varying degrees, but that's kind of like, the technical side, and you continue up that if very few people do past that, but there are levels where, you become basically like a technical influencer. You made this thing, and, you're like the grandfather of this thing, and, you start to influence either a product or technology or something. And you may still code, but you really influence more the direction of it, as like, you'd think a business leader would, but more so from the technical side. And then you can just stay a software engineer, of course, where you just love writing code and you expand your influence through writing, code that, helps others and makes, promotes patterns maybe that are better. And and you still sort of play the architect role a tiny bit at that level. But that's kind of it for the technical side. I mean, there's a whole bunch of levels, but in between, but that kind of gives a taste for them. That you can also go the management side, of course. And that's when you have to ask yourself, do I enjoy making impact through helping people and guiding them, and not necessarily telling them what to do, but managing that, like, I have this thing that I own, how can I achieve that through others? That's the management role. And I've seen managers who still could, so it's still possible. Definitely less time, I think, because of the reality of how much time is in a day. But yeah, that's kind of where those two paths go. And then there's middle management all the way to upper management. And I don't know what like VPs do or anything. So but I imagine it's the theme of increased scope, I imagine, and impact. So
yeah, that's great. I think what, to kind of summarize that, right? If you're technical and you like to code, a good starting place is to jump into a career in software engineering, right? And then I was going to ask you this, but you kind of covered it, right? As you grow, you could take the path of, do I want to help people and help other software engineers grow? Okay, I can take this manager route, or I can take this IC route and continue to contribute as a general software engineer, or you can kind of take this architect route, right? Where you may not be coding directly as much, but you're actually thinking about the right systems to choose, the right technologies to pick to actually build, your product at scale, and make sure, right, you guys are able to handle the load as your business grows and you communicate with other systems within the company.
And I just adding a tiny bit to it. There are plenty of software engineers that I knew, either as interns or first year like engineers, junior engineers, who make the switch to PM. So I'll say it this way: I've seen a lot more people switch from software engineers to PMs than the other way around. I don't know if that's decisiveness or an indicator of decisiveness or anything, or maybe people just realize that they don't like coding all day. So those, I mean, I guess if you're unsure, try out software development, and then you can swap to a PM, I think, pretty easily, because you still have that same mindset, you just do less of the technical.
Great. And what do you think about, like, let's say you're a technical person, you don't want to go into product, you don't want to continue to be an engineer, but you do want to get closer to the customer. What are your thoughts around a solutions architect or a solutions engineer? Do you see that path being taken?
I suppose that is another path. I don't know much about it, honestly, and I don't really have aspirations to pursue that, but there is a role, right, where you're more intertwined with, say, sales, and you help cobble together these solutions. Say, for example, in Azure, how I'm a customer and I'm coming to Microsoft, I want a solution. And then there's this technical role that needs to be able to go and say, okay, you need this service, you need that service. And then let me make a prototype for you and show you how you can do this. And, maybe it makes that sale or breaks that sale for the customer. So that is definitely a valid role and a critical role to any business. Yeah, I don't know. There's a bunch of other roles like that are similar to that, where you're basically making technical solutions for people, and you may be coding not products, but integrating systems.
Great.
Sweet. This is great, Chris. Thanks a lot for your advice on everything from software engineering to career advice to even projects you were working on. This is super cool. Would love to have you back on the pod again in the future. I think there's so much more we could unpack in terms of like the interview process, or like who you interact with on a day-to-day basis and what those interactions are like. Even maybe getting into the politics and stuff like that, or what it's like to really like build a feature. There's so much more we can go into, but this was great. I think we're getting a little low on time, so wanted to wrap and yeah, pretty much just say thank you again. And for all our listeners, if you have any feedback Would love to hear your feedback either by commenting or sending us an email at techknowledicalpod@gmail.com. Don't forget to like and subscribe, and we'll see you next week. Thanks.
Yeah, Chris, we're gonna need your GitHub so we can
Yes.
we can all go check out your passion projects. So.
Yeah, I think it's CH. My username is CHCARU. You just do github.com/that, and we can put it in the description maybe. But yeah, thanks for having me, guys. It was a lot of fun, and yeah, like you said, there's so much more we could talk to, and the time flew. Maybe because I ramble, I don't know. But yeah, we'd love to come back on and talk about those things in more detail.
Cool.
Great.
See you guys.
See ya.